Hello world, Zan here. Going to be recording a new series starting with the nation overview for LA Satis. I know from a lot of people this is considered one of the worst nations in the late age, most of which due to their abysmal expansion and them just being an overall rush target. They have some of the nastiest mages I've seen. Um, they do have assassins, but they lost their slave warriors, the elite warriors or whatnot, the little trident guys. So this is probably their weakest iteration in the early game, which is really saying something. But I think it might be. I can't even say it's the most powerful in the late game because they don't have the astral communions that EA and MA do. But it's still pretty. It's pretty beefy. So this will be actually done with DE and another mod called the Boz mod. And I'm going to try to remember to go over the national spells and the summons because with DE and the Boz mod, there are a ton, and they're actually extremely relevant because the roster is kind of bad. I have here open DE, so if maybe some stat changes are different, I might not notice. Apologize, but usually it should run the same because, to be honest, not many people play this nation or like it. We'll do the units first, and these are you have all of these units except for these two lizards here in all ages. And the rules are kind of the same, which is malicious for siege chaff. They're absolute garbage otherwise. Heavy infantry in EA were fantastic with 16 prot. 16 prot is actually not even that good anymore in the late age. However, there's still decent line holders with average defense, strong protection, uh, because all lizards get 5 natural protection off the bat. And they have one thing I also noticed is kind of important. Lizards have higher than normal magic resistance. Their problem is they have very low morale, so you need to have some good leaders for them, and they don't really do too much damage. Other than that, they're cheapish units, just line holders. They have City Guard, which I actually recruit a few of these here and there just because they have this castle defense bonus. But overall, and you'll see this trend as Elicitus, there's going to be a point where you just don't really recruit units. You don't need to. And we'll get to why later, but it kind of stands with this reanimated dead part. But it's still useful. At the beginning, your starting army is going to have a bunch of these light infantry that just have the 5 natural protection. And they're neat, I guess, because they have a javelin, but they suck. Most of the LA Status units suck. Uh, these guys, however, this is my favorite recruitable unit, the Fashioneers. I think they're fantastic. If you get some buffs on them, 6 attacks per square at 18 slashing. Then if you do like Strength of Giants or whatever, it's gonna be 22 each. I think as far as a unit goes, this is really good. In the grand scheme, compared to other nations, though, not really. Um, this might have had its time to shine in the late age with the loss of the elite warriors, but the problem is they have very low defense skill, so they're going to take a lance to the face, and they're dual wielding, so they're going to also take a crossbow to the face. So it's a really awkward unit that if you're able to mix in with your heavy infantry, you'll have some killing power. Although the combat speed difference makes it awkward. I think they have the combat speed of these guys, the light infantry. So it's a really awkward combination. But if you can get them to not absorb the big hits and then just start slashing with their double fashions, they're pretty good. The Tomb Guard is the cap only sacred. They're absurdly expensive, although they're kind of good. I mean, they have above average. They have elite stats, 15 hit points on a size 2, which is good. High magic resistance, high morale, 7 natural protection on top of the fact that they have plate armor. So this is the ultimate Statistician tank. Problem is they're absurdly expensive and absurdly slow. So it's like, by the time you can afford this, do you really want to be paying 23 gold and all these resources and things for these guys? They're not going to die. They definitely won't die. Um, but you can get a lot for that money. Poison slingers are going to be your only access to poison, really, as LA Satis, because you don't have the paths to do foul vapors anymore. They're kind of important at this point. Their sling itself, if it hits, will do 5 armor negating poison damage, and then we'll also have an AoE cloud in the same vein as foul vapors, and it lingers for a little bit. The cloud can kill some of your own dudes because they only have like 6 or 7. I think these guys have less. Yeah, but like deserty ones have more natural protection, less poison resistance. But it's still your only source of poison damage, and in the late age, it's very useful for killing knights or heavy cavalry because the rest of the units really aren't going to do it. The Falchineers might, but it's also dangerous to use them again because they don't like getting hit. Now, this unit here, this Desert Ranger, I know in any mention of LA Satis, this is always considered the only good unit, and that's even then that's a tough sell. This is not great at all. Where it would be perfect is for expansion. This is probably the guy you would recruit. It has 9 combat speed, which is the same as the Falchineers, so you can actually mix these guys with Falchineers. They have javelins. This is a good unit for expansion. In the grand scheme of things versus actual players, this is still going to be hot garbage. But expansion is going to be butts as Satis with or without the Desert Rangers. All right, so that's just a quick little run through the units. The commanders, you have mostly the same commanders as all the ages. The basic, I guess, commander, the Lizard Lord, which now has 80 leadership for formations. H1 Hierodules, which are neat because they actually only 30 gold. That's pretty much their goodness. They're fairly cheap. H2s for 80 gold. They can also do, they can summon snakes at 1 per temple, which is okay, I guess. You're essentially going to pay the upkeep cost that he per turn as the recruitment cost, and the snakes I think are 4 gold a year or something like that. I mean, it's okay. It's a unit. It's my issue with them would be the logistics to actually mass them or do anything with it is rough. But if you're using a lot of living infantry, you might need it because if you remember the heavy infantry guys, they only have 9 morale, and those serpents are standard bearers. Yeah, overall the morale's low. So if you're using living units, you might need those snakes just to boost morale. They're probably going to die because they'll run ahead of all these armored units and get killed. That sucks. But it is what it is. Now you have recruit anywhere holy threes, which a lot of nations wish they could do. They are slow to recruit and kind of expensive. Luckily they're sacred, so the upkeep isn't, prohibitive. They have really high magic resistance. They're good natural protection, high hit points for a size 2, and just beautiful stats. If you wanted, a living basic thug, I mean, you could use this. It's just hard to recruit one for that purpose. So, anyways, that's a holy pass, and I guess they're mages. They don't have a lot, and 2 of them are cap only. We'll get there. So you have the reborn, and honestly, there's not too much purpose to these guys. They have a few benefits with their paths, which is D1 and then either D2 or D1 F1. So D1 F1 is kind of bad. Later in the game, it can do things. If you give it a gem to Phoenix Fire and Flaming Pillar, I think is the spell. Early on, it's kind of just like Bane Fire Darts or Corpse Candles. It's rough using them. So I try to avoid these guys just because they can't do much without help. The D2 ones are okay, but it's 8 morale. They're good for having 16 map move, whereas some of your other mages have 14. That's about it. Oh, and they come out in 1 turn. That can be important sometimes. We're gonna skip this guy because it's kind of like the Data Ghost for this nation. It's gonna take me a bit to talk about him. We're gonna go to the Empoisoner, which is the cap-only assassin that's present, I think, in all the ages. It has 14 map move, which sucks because they're cap only. They're your only source of nature right now in late age, which also kind of sucks because now it's cap only, but you have to spend turns site searching with them to get some nature because you want to be able to cast Swarm with them, and Swarm will cost you a nature gem each time. They're fairly good assassins with a patience of 2, but they cannot climb walls. So that's relevant. So climbing walls is kind of if you are sieging a castle, they cannot assassinate while you are sieging. Whereas some nations like Ubar, for example, they can siege your castle and then have all their assassins and seducers and whatever just have a field day with your forces. And then when they actually go to attack the castle, there's no commanders left. These guys can't do that. Other than that, very high magic resistance. These are very good paths for anti-undead and just assassination in general. Because even if you go enchantment to get Horde of Skeletons, they can do Horde of Skeletons with the gem. And they can also do Swarm if you go Alteration. So they can always be useful, pretty much. You have a Keeper of the Tombs, which in DE they get this. They come with a Corpse Candle, which can be useful to harass the enemy early on. Corpse Candles and Will-O-Wisps, I think both they're ethereal and they have I think 20 defense, so they're really good at just tanking stuff essentially. They have their attack is a little Banefire Decay thing, so it can potentially hit something important, but really it's a distraction. These guys, unfortunately, are also mat move 14. Their stats are garbage. They have a purpose, and we'll get to that, but that purpose is pretty much only in DE. In vanilla, the only time you might recruit these guys over an Empoisoner is they're cheaper than Reborn for the same 9 research ability, and they have a Holy Path. So if you want to if you need a priest for something, you're not using Holy 3, maybe you'll use them to bless. It's awkward. DE gives them a purpose, which is kind of neat. And I actually built a ton of these due to DE's reasoning, because there's a certain point in my playthrough where I'm very gold hungry and I need research points, and these guys are better at that than Reborn. All right, now finally, and I might end the video with this one, just so I can keep this short and then make another video with I guess the DE stuff, the summons and the sacreds, whatever. So this Armancer is kind of like the Data Ghost for Erythea. The entire nation is on this guy's back, so you know they have not skipped that day. They are a F1 D3 H1 base, and then they have another path, Fire, Earth, Astral Death, and then a 10% path, 10% chance to get another one. So by default, in the late age, this is a 4-path mage or a 5-path mage. And then, honestly, at the rate you are going to recruit these guys, they're going to be a significant amount of 6-path mages because they are not cap only. You recruit this from everywhere. They are slow to recruit, expensive, and sacred. So even then, again, their upkeep isn't crazy for their cost. Slow to recruit kind of sucks if you're in a defensive war because you don't know if your castle might get under siege, which is why I mentioned the Reborn earlier. However, when you're not in a defensive war, it's actually good because you will have gold every other turn. So like if you queue up 1,000 gold worth of this guy, worth of these guys in your forts, the next turn you will not have spent any gold on mages, but still be recruiting mages, if that makes any sense at all. So you're gonna have one turn where you have no money, and then you have one turn where you have a significant amount of money. It's weird, and I think that's a pro, but we'll see what everyone else says. Now, they have 5 natural protection like all the other lizards, good magic resistance. They cross rivers, poison resistant. They're cold-blooded, which the entire nation is cold-blooded, and we can probably get to that in the next video where we talk about spells. Or no, you know what? Well, cold-blooded is easy. In cold temperature, their encumbrance goes up. They don't take like extra fatigue per round. They're not like weak against cold. Their encumbrance just goes up. So I think at cold 3, it is 10 encumbrance, which is debilitating. Don't fight in gold. And the other problem is the majority of them are going to be old age. I think the ones that get death randoms will not be old age, and obviously the ones that get fire randoms will be even older old age. So they have problems, but at the end of the day, this is a 5-path mage in the late age, where most mages are like 3 or 4 or less. And then the paths are important because, wide paths are considered bad usually when it's not in a communion. And this guy's path, like a Death 3 mage is always good. And a fourth of them will be a Death 4 mage, like a Lich. A Lich is Death 4. And this guy's going to be Death 4 and have something else. Nasty. They're really good. Um, oops. Now, the spells they can cast, and one of the reasons they are deadly, especially in mass, the premier Satis spell is Banefire. I'll probably show you that spell directly in the next video when I talk about their national spells and stuff. It's not a national spell, but it may as well be. Not many mages cast this. And the main thing with Banefire is uh, it's 55 armor piercing in an AoE 1 that also has some large AoE radius decay on it. And every single one of these guys can cast it. Now the Death 4 ones can cast it better. I'll take less fatigue. But every single one can cast it because the paths to cast it are Death 3, Fire 1. And where that's important is they can do this on turn 1. So if they were fighting, and again, just due to my experience, and if you guys have followed my series, you'll kind of see how I used it. If they were fighting my Arathea, and for whatever reason they were in range of my tight formation, these guys will turn 1 start dropping Banefires. And I think with the fatigue cost of Banefire, they can do 4 or 5 of them before they fall asleep. Now, if it's in cold, obviously it'll be less because of the encumbrance. But if they get 4 or 5 off in a tight formation, they have deleted 4 to 5 squares of your units because there are not a lot of units that can tank 55 armor piercing damage. And it's not fire damage, so it doesn't matter if you're fire resistant. That's insane. It's especially devastating against communion nations because now whatever math they might have done in their communion, it's going to be off if they lose some mages here and there. If they lose masters, maybe the communion will last longer, but if they start losing slaves, it might explode early. On top of the fact, in a large radius, they're going to start decaying. And decay, after I spoke to Logi, Logi is this super wizard that discovers everything about this game. He's great. Um, it's a magic resistance check to get hit by it, and magic resistance check every turn, I think, to make it go away. And in the meantime, it's going to aid you. It's a complicated formula, but I think it was about 5 years per turn. And each time it does this, you have a 50% chance of taking 1 armor negating damage. It's a difficult decay is difficult to go away. So usually what happens is by the end of the battle, everyone that got decayed is going to die. Or a very large portion of them will die. During the battle, mages might have their spells interrupted. They might get spooked and run. People that are old age, I believe they take extra damage. It's even worse for them. So, and in the late age, there's a lot more old age communions going on, so it's relevant. And that's just Banefire. That's one thing these guys can do. Premier Horde of Skeleton casters, because obviously Death 3, they're already getting it half off, and sometimes Death 4, so it's even more. They can cast Ghost Grip on thugs and a super combatants. Ghost Grip's a armor piercing fatigue spell that hits a bunch of times. They can cast Disintegrate very later on, which is a very short range Soul Slay kind of effect without Soul Slay, just 999 damage. And they can literally just cast that forever. I think it's like 10 fatigue to cast it normally, and these guys over level it. Just anything that needs death magic, these are your dudes because they are almost always better than a Lich. The only thing a Lich has on them is being immortal. Now, the Earth randoms, there's some spells you might use early on. The Earth randoms will do something like Magma Bolts, which is just very high damage evocation that lights some targets on fire. That's fairly important if they're resistant. The fire randoms can do Fireball. Later on, they can do Combustion. Combustion and I think Conflagration are these big AoE light people on fire spells, which is useful if you're fighting things like that have Blood Vengeance, for example, because you're not doing the damage, you're just lighting them on fire. They happen to be burning. Oops. Things that are fire resistant can burn. So like Abyssians can be lit on fire and they will burn to death. Hilarious. The death random is just a better Saruman. It's a little bit better. The astral randoms are kind of neat. They can do some tricky stuff. Um, Obviously, you can do tiny communions for an extra +1, or cast big spells, bone grinding, um, rigor mortis, life after death. You don't need communions to cast these spells, mind you. Every single one of these can cast rigor mortis or life after death. But with a communion now, you're using less fatigue. Your guy is going to turret longer. They're going to have roughly the same paths. Or actually, well, if they're in a communion of themselves, it's going to be the same paths. So it's going to be a very stable communion. It's just overall, they can do some crazy stuff. Um, if you're an alteration, body ethereal. I mean, you don't want to use this guy for body ethereal, like it hurts because they're expensive. But hey, if you have the astral, use it. The only worry I'll say is try not to use the astral ones if you're fighting like Banderlog or any other nation that has low level astral and mass, because they might magic duel them and that will suck. But otherwise, these are great bats. Oh, very important for astral as well. They do nether darts. Nether darts is also something that will devastate communions because it'll do a feeble mind on where it hits. You don't get the big version of the spell until very late, even after Banefire. But early on, there's a baby one that you can use if someone's throwing like a super combatant at you or a monster. All right, so just off of this screen, I think we're mostly okay. The nation itself, you're gonna have citadels. Underwater forts, I think, is part of Bosmod. I don't think that's normal. Um, you have a heat scale 2, which in my opinion is probably the best temperature affinity because you take the least amount of penalties. And obviously, as these guys, since they're all cold-blooded, you don't want to be in the cold anyways. And then the Reanimate Dead. Yeah, Reanimating Dead is kind of important, and I know I'm glossing over this a little bit because some in the videos later. The Reanimate Dead is part of the nation itself, and the requirements are that you be undead and that you have holy paths. That's it. So, like, if you recruit a bunch of indie priests and life after death them, for example, they can all reanimate. And the reanimations are important because these guys specifically get a Tomb Chariot. No, again, next video. Um, Tomb Chariots are very low HP, size 4 Tremblers. And maybe that doesn't sound crazy when they only have like 7 hit points. But they have very, very high damage, high attack skill. They can repel, which is hilarious. And more importantly, they trample. um, Once we get to the series, you'll see how bonkers they can get. Um, but yeah, I think that will cover the base part of this of the nation. And I guess I'll see you in the next video, talking about the spells and the summons.